Check one, two. Hey guys, good evening. I'm sorry we're starting a little late. We had issues with YouTube allowing us to stream. It was giving us a new error. Somehow YouTube has changed its terms and conditions and we have to modify our live streams based on that, and we did not know that before going live today. That took us a little time to modify all the settings that we do in all our streaming softwares and everything else. We are going to start in less than 30 seconds, so please hold on to your seats and we are starting. And of course I am going to turn on my chat till then and see what you guys are saying, and of course answer questions. Let's make this very interactive. I will answer all the questions I can, and we will exceed time a little bit. The time will go a little over because we're already starting half an hour over. So I really hope you guys stick around till the end, because there is something really big that I'm going to announce towards the end. So guys, welcome to Camera Basics and Camera Modes, and today we are going to take you through your initial journey when you start clicking photographs or shooting video using your DSLR camera. I am going to be talking about some of the basics, and some of the things that I will be focusing on are purely focused on the basics of photography. I will be talking about shutter, aperture, ISO. I will be talking how to hold your camera to get the best results, and of course our cheat sheet for you to get those sharp images in some of the situations that you get stuck in. If you have any questions, please put in the chat box. I have my iPad right here where I am monitoring all my things. So guys, I'm gonna make a minor adjustment. I think we're ready. Yep. First of all, if you guys have not downloaded the Shoot Guru app, the Shoot Guru app is 100% free. Link is in the description of this video, this live stream. So you guys can actually go and download the Shoot Guru app. You can get this video over there plus a lot more. This video will not be available on YouTube post this session. It will go on to the app, Shoot Guru app, and it will be available there. So to begin with, can I ask everybody in the chat box what you do currently? If you're a photographer, put your name. I really want to know who is watching this live session. So put your name and next to it say what you do. Thank you guys. I'm seeing so many replies. There are people coming from all over India and some international as well. It is amazing that you guys have joined us tonight. I know it is a late night, but there is nothing late when you start learning. So the first and foremost thing we need to know when we are using a DSLR camera, I have here is the Lumix S1R. This is a full frame camera from Lumix. Now this is a basic big form factor of any DSLR camera, and we need to first understand what the different parts of the camera are. For this, if you look at the screen, you have some very basic things. The viewfinder, that is on the back, is called a viewfinder. This is where you look through the lens through, and then next to it is a small round dial which actually adjusts the focus of your viewfinder. That is called a diopter. The play button on your camera is not a play button. You call it the picture review button or clip review button. When I am talking about all of this only for one reason: when you are working with professionals, when you are in the market, when you are in front of your clients, you should know all this so that you sound that more intelligent that you really are, and your clients will take you very seriously. Going ahead, you have the lens alignment marks. So every camera has, every lens has a lens alignment mark over here. You align it to kind of fix the lens to your camera. And right next to that on the camera is your focal distance marker as well. The focal distance is not actually recorded from the lens, it is actually recorded from the sensor. So that marker, that small dash with the circle in the center, is a focal distance marker that allows you to measure the focal distance from the sensor. Then the trigger is actually called a shutter release. It is not called a trigger button. Trigger button is a slang for it. So you actually call it a trigger release. And of course, the small button, if you've ever wondered, on the bottom left is actually the depth of field preview. It actually tells you what's the focal distance that you're shooting on and what are the settings that you need to be on. Then of course, the thing on top is actually called a hot shoe. This is the connector where you connect your speed light and sometimes even mics. The thing on top is called the hot shoe. You have an LCD control panel display, and of course the battery slot and the tripod head. Now this is called the tripod head on the bottom because this is where the tripod base plate goes, and you have a small screw thread over there which allows you to connect any kind of tripod to your camera. So going ahead, if you have any questions, just please ask. I will pick those questions up. There is a slight lag in me looking at the questions and answering them, so please bear with that. YouTube works with a little lag, and we will overcome that by answering the questions. Towards the end, I will pick up the questions one by one and we will answer them. Don't worry about it. So how does the camera really work? The camera really works on three different factors: the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO. All these three factors in reality control the exposure of your camera. It is the exposure of the sensor to the light that is falling onto the sensor. So all these three things do three different functions. Now we need to understand what controls each. If I talk about aperture, now the aperture is measured in f-stops. There is also another measurement for aperture, which is a t-stop. You usually get the t-stop in the manual lenses, in cinema lenses, because that is more accurate and it allows you to move aperture very smoothly between one stop to another. But for photography and your basic lenses, the f-stop is your basic measurement. Now, the aperture is actually controlled by your lens. No, it's not controlled by your camera or the sensor, but it is actually controlled by the lens. So the lens opening and closing is what aperture is all about. It is actually the amount of light that is falling onto your camera sensor. That is what is measured by aperture, or even controlled by aperture. So aperture is basically the opening of the lens through these blades that allow light to enter onto your sensor and actually controls the amount of light. The smaller the number, the bigger the aperture. If you look at the screen, f1.4 is a very small number, but look at the opening. It is the largest opening on the lens if the lens is an f1.4 lens. And of course, towards f22, the opening closes and becomes very small. That means you are actually reducing the amount of light that falls onto the sensor. Now, the larger the opening, of course, means you are getting more light onto your sensor, and you are getting more amount of light, capturing more light on the sensor and on your image. And as you increase the number, you are reducing light and your image becomes darker. I'm just looking at some questions as well. Nothing yet, but guys, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Just go ahead and ask them and we will take them up. Going ahead, like I said, the aperture controls the amount of light. It also controls the depth of field. When I say depth of field, what it very basically means in a layman language is the blur that you see in the background. So if your subject is standing at a particular distance and the background is at a further distance and it is shallow, that means it's blurred. That is what is being controlled by the aperture as well. So the larger the aperture, you have more blur in your background, you have shallower depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the darker the light gets. Everything is in focus because the shallow depth of field reduces, and this happens only when you're shooting in very bright light situations. Let's say you're shooting at 12 p.m. outside in the afternoon, you will have to increase the aperture. If you can't manage too much with your shutter or your ISO, then you have to increase it and you will end up losing your depth of field. So if you want those amazing beautiful bokeh in the background, the blur in the background, you have to keep your lens open at the largest opening. But guys, here is a pro tip. If you're shooting video with the same lens, the largest opening might not be the sharpest. And when I say that is, let's say your lens opens largest at 1.4. That means at f1.4 the lens might not be the sharpest, because at f1.4 the focus point is very small and the focus could shift from the eyelashes to the eye. Whereas if you have a one stop down, let's say f2 or an f2.8 for that matter, your range of your focus increases. And if your subject is moving, because in videos it is usually moving, we have human subjects, they tend to move, so you have a range in which you can actually keep your subject in focus. So for video guys, it's a tip that always have your lens open at one stop below its largest opening. इसका बहुत बेसिक मतलब है that if your lens opens at f1.4, for video keep it at f2.8 or f2, it works brilliantly. So going ahead, you have to understand what is controlled by aperture as well as depth of field. So in depth of field, you have to understand one more thing. Let's say I am your subject. There is a foreground that is ahead of me and there is a background that is behind me. The focus range of my camera is somewhere in between. If I move ahead and if I move back, the focus will change. If I go too back, if you see for yourself, it has gone out of focus. But if I come back to the position where the camera took focus when we began, it is still in focus. So your shallow depth of field works both ways. It works on foreground as well as in background, and you have to be careful what aperture settings you do to get those sharp images. Some creative views, if you are shooting in low light situations, if you're shooting at night, or if you're shooting in situations where you can create some amazing light bokehs in the background, then you have to have the largest opening. You have to have an opening of about 1.4, 2.8 or even 1.2. If you are lucky enough to have a lens that opens 1.2, which are expensive lenses, you will actually get some very beautiful bokeh in the background, nice blur in the background, and that looks amazing. For portraits, we recommend f2.8 to f5.6 for portraits and sports, for one simple reason: your subjects might be moving faster, they moving from one position to another much faster, so taking focus will take time. So you need to be very careful, especially doing dancing portraits, or if you're doing fashion portraits where your subjects keep changing poses quite fast and you're not using speed lights or you're not using continuous lights, you're shooting in natural lighting situations. Try and keep it between 2.0 and 5.6. It works brilliantly. Landscapes are amazing shot at f8 to f16, especially if you're doing street photography. The f11 to f16 is your bracket because you need to showcase everything, and that is the beauty of shooting landscapes and street photography, that everything needs to be in focus. So you shoot on smaller apertures of f8 to f16 that look very, very beautiful. And of course, long exposures, if you're doing very, very slow shutter speeds, you're trying to make light trails or something like that, if you don't want the ghosting effect, do f16 to f32. Don't worry about shooting at f22 or f32. It gives you aberrations, yes, but the aberrations are so minor that a naked eye cannot really capture them. So if you're doing landscapes where you need to capture everything in the entirety, go ahead, test a f22 out. If that works for you, amazing. If it doesn't, then open your aperture to about f16 to f11. It also works, but f22 does work, guys. Don't hesitate to use it. It is always a good option. Yeah, so I think I've covered most of the questions as well. I keep looking at the questions when I'm looking on my right. Going ahead, the second factor in your camera that controls exposure is the shutter speed. Now the shutter speed is actually something that is being controlled by the camera. You control the shutter speed of the camera. We are in the digital age. There is no physical shutter. There is nothing that opens or closes. Then where does the shutter speed really come in? We have something that is called as e-shutter or electronic shutter. This is basically the refresh rate of your sensor and how your sensor really works. Now these come at different speed settings and different factors. Slower shutter, and guys, it is measured in 1/2, so 1/10 of a second. When I say like 1/10 of a second means like 1/30 means 1/30th of a second. So if you divide 1 second into 30 parts, that is how you measure that speed. Similarly, 1/1000 means 1 divided by 1000. So if you divide your 1 second into 1000 parts, that is the speed of your shutter. That is the duration of light, for which the light is falling onto your sensor. So the shutter controls the duration of light falling onto your sensor. Again, aperture controls the amount of light, shutter controls the duration of light. The faster the shutter, the faster you freeze motion, the easier it is for you to freeze motion. At shutter speeds of 10 seconds to 1/30th of a second, these are slower shutter speed, you will get blur, you will get motion blur, you will get light streaks, you will get light painting. All of that is done under 1/30th of a second to about 10 seconds. That is very easily manageable. At 1/250th or 1/60th of a second is your everyday play objects, everyday photos, everything, people around you, portraits. All of this is actually controlled between 1/250th to 1/60th of a second. But if you're shooting cars, if you're shooting sports, if you're capturing some amazing action happening in front of you, you need to take your shutter speeds higher, and shutter speeds between 1/1000 and 1/4000 of a second work brilliantly. If you look at the image on the screen, the top that you see at 1/2000 of a second, it is perfectly frozen, it is not moving, whereas 1/2, that is half a second, it has a motion blur and you can't really make out what it really is. So this is what essentially shutter speeds do. What are the different situations that these shutter speeds can actually work in? The fastest if you're capturing action, if you're capturing things happening around you like birds, like people, sports, then 1/4000 of a second to 1/1000 second works brilliantly. Regular action, that is regular cars on the road, regular people walking on the road, so 1/500th of a second works very nicely. You still don't get any kind of motion blur. 1/60th to 1/150th of a second is a situation where people are moving slowly, they're not moving too fast, nobody's running around, or there is no such major fast forward action happening. You can still capture good sharp images without getting too much motion blur. But 1/60th of a second, you guys have to be very careful about that. 1/60th of a second, your camera is now in a motion blur situation where it is capturing natural motion blur to record images onto your sensor. So at 1 by 60th of a second, you will get shake, you will get some motion blur if your camera is moving too fast than your subject, and it will actually hamper your quality of images as well. Anything below that is a complete no-no when it comes to shooting handheld. So anything below 1 by 60th of a second should not be shot handheld. Even at 1 by 60th of a second on its own, if you're using, let's say, 50 mm lens, so 1 by 60th of a second is decent enough speed to shoot on. And I'm going to explain the speeds in just a little while. We have a very special chart just meant for today. For you guys, it's a special treat where you can use it as a cheat sheet. You can take a screenshot of this presentation, but if you join the app, you get the PDF of this event on the app. Again, going ahead, if you shoot under 1 by 60th of a second to about 10 seconds, you have to put it on a tripod. You have to give it stability. Let's check some questions before I go ahead. So Ria has a question where she's asking if she uses 1 by 500th of shutter speed, what should be the aperture settings and what should be the ISO settings. Well, it all depends how much of an ambient light there is. Now I have a rule of thumb. If I go on a shoot, the first thing that I check is the aperture. I will check how much of an aperture do I need. That means if I have to shoot everything in focus, that means I need lower numbers, and that means I need higher apertures, higher numbers and lower apertures. But if I am shooting portraits, if I'm shooting people, and the low light situation is that I need larger apertures, I need lower numbers and larger apertures. Now, once I fix my aperture, let's say I fix my aperture at about 2.8, where I say, okay, this is something which is decent for me and this is what I want. The second thing I'm going to check is whether I can actually manage shutter at whatever speed I wanted. Let's say, Ria, in your case, you want to fix it at 1 by 500th of a second. So at f2.8, if you are doing 1 by 500th of a second and still you're not getting the light that you want, or still you're getting dark images, you play with the third and a very, very important function of your camera, that is ISO. ISO is actually the quality of light that your sensor is receiving once the aperture opens and once the shutter opens. This is something that is controlled by the sensor. When we used to shoot on film, when films were the main factor, we always used to pick up films that were 100 ISO or 400 ISO, and 100 ISO films costed us more because the quality of light was mind-blowing. We did not get any gain or anything in that quality. So you will have to manage your ISO if you're shooting at higher shutter speeds or lower apertures, and that will actually hamper your overall exposure. A good balance is when you can fix your aperture first, decide on your shutter speed. Finally, when you have nothing left, that is when you come and play with your ISO. ISO, guys, is always your last option. We need to understand ISO. When we are in bright lit situations, when we know that it is good light, I will always prefer to shoot at 100 ISO. 100 ISO gives me the clarity, gives me the sharpness, gives me no gain whatsoever. So images and videos, if shot in 100 ISO, are beautiful. But depending on the situation, let's say you move in or there is a cloud cover, you keep increasing your ISO increments, and as and when the ISO increments increase, they will increase the gain, they will increase the noise in your images, and your images will keep looking bad. Some cameras like the one I have here are very efficient even at 6400 ISO, or I have even tested some cameras at 12,000 ISOs. Those cameras still give you good quality images. But if you're using entry-level cameras, I always recommend never ever go beyond 1250 ISO, because beyond 1250 ISO you will ruin your images, and any bad looking image is not always art. Especially when it comes to black and white images. I know people love gain in black and white images, but you have to understand that a gain that ruins the quality of the image is something that will not be good for your portfolio. So since there are no more questions, I think we should be going in. Guys, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Just ask them. There is no such thing as a bad question. Go ahead and ask us your questions and we will answer them. And if I don't answer them now, I will pick them up towards the end and I will definitely make sure I answer it. Now, every camera has a lot of modes and we're always confused about what mode to select and what mode fits the best. All of us start with the auto mode. Auto mode is also a mode that kind of controls the camera, controls you and you not controlling the camera, if you ask me. Why? Because the camera does everything for you. It manages your shutter, it manages your ISO, it manages your aperture. It is controlling every single element of your camera. It is controlling every setting of your camera, and hence you will not be able to do too much. Especially if you're stuck in bad light situations, especially stuck in situations where you need to manually adjust your cameras, I would always recommend skip the auto mode and move ahead. Now to move ahead, we need to understand what the different modes do. And just before that, let me see, there is a question that's popped up, and if that is a good question, we will take that up. Okay, Dhruv, video questions I will take post this session. Don't worry about it. I will answer that question. That's a very interesting one, but it's a very video basic question. Going ahead, the main mode of your camera is the manual mode. The manual mode allows you to control every single setting, from your white balance to your ISO to your shutter to your aperture. Every single detail of your camera is controlled manually. You need to know the perfect combinations. You need to know the perfect settings. You need to know how and when you are managing those settings in different situations. But what if you're in a situation where you can't manually do it? And guys, manual takes time, manual takes practice, and you need to understand the combinations. And there is no fixed recipe. If you ask me what is the best situation to click images in this lighting, I will have a different setting for you. But if I even switch off one light, the whole setting will change and I will tell you different settings altogether. So every situation asks for different combinations. There are millions of permutations and combinations that can be created with settings. Sometimes the 100 ISO works. You add your aperture and you add your shutter to it to get great images. And in some cases you need to increase your ISO because you needs to be depending on light. So the manual mode is something that controls everything. Then you have the S mode or the TV mode. So this is actually the shutter priority mode. What the shutter priority mode, as the name says, is it is giving priority to your shutter settings. For example, Priya, you had a question where you asked me that what are the settings that are best for 1/500th of a shutter. If you ask me, if you're fixing your shutter at 1/500 and you don't want to change it, let your camera do everything else. Let your camera decide what its ISO is. Let your camera decide what its aperture is. So in the shutter priority mode, basically you fix your shutter speed at one setting that you prefer, and you let the camera manage the ISO and of course manage the aperture as well. Then similarly, you have something which is the opposite of the shutter priority mode. It is the aperture priority mode, A or AV mode. In the aperture priority mode, like the name says, once you fix the aperture value of your lens, the camera will manage everything else. The camera will manage your shutter speed, the camera will manage your ISO. But guys, you have to remember one thing. If you are in low light situations and if you fix your aperture at a value and you allow the camera to manage shutter, you have a tendency of getting motion blur in your images. This is how your phones work. Your phones usually have fixed apertures in the different lenses. If you have a multi-lens phone, the different lenses have a fixed aperture. For phones, that is the fixed opening of the lens. The lenses cannot physically open or close. The blur and the shallow depth of field that you get in phones is actually digitally created. But if you're shooting aperture priority, you guys have to remember that in low light situations, if your camera pumps up or reduces the shutter speed, you will end up getting motion blurs, you will end up getting blurs and that look very bad, and the blur that comes with your camera also looks very bad. So that is a problem of the aperture priority mode. Similarly, the problem with the shutter priority mode is, since it is controlling the ISO or it is controlling the aperture for you, the camera might increase the aperture or decrease it and give you different results with the same situation, and your consistency in your images will change. Avoid it. But then you have something which is called the program mode. The program mode is actually a combination of the aperture and shutter, and you can manage the ISO separately. The program mode can be managed depending on the camera brand that you're using. Every program mode comes with specialities in terms of what combinations, permutations and combination it is giving you. It comes on an AI learning, where the camera learns that what situations you shoot in and gives you the perfect settings. That is my go-to thing when I am not interested in any of the manual modes, be it manual, shutter or aperture priority modes. I skip to the P mode, because P mode actually gives me the ability to control my ISO, whereas it gives me the best combinations between the shutter as well as the aperture. So Ria, if you are getting darker images in shutter priority mode, that means you are either shooting too much against light, where light, when it falls directly onto your camera, is controlling most of the exposure, or you are in a situation where it needs slower shutter speeds, it needs more light to fall onto your camera, and your ISO compensations and your aperture compensations are not matching. There is another thing. There is something called, which I'm not discussing today because it's an advanced topic, is exposure compensation. What exposure compensation is basically a setting which makes your images darker or lighter even in any situation, but in the aperture and shutter priority modes. So let's say if you have a shutter priority mode and you keep your exposure compensation on a negative, you will get a darker image, but if you keep it in positive, you get a brighter image. Try that out. Maybe that is a problem. For more information, you can get in touch with me on my WhatsApp number, which I will flash somewhere during this presentation, and you guys will have a direct line to me where you can ask all your problems or even get onto a video call with me and get explanations. That is a benefit we give to all the people who attend our workshops. Going ahead, you have some features which are like the auto features of your camera. The first feature is a macro or a close-up mode. Now what this basically does is that it allows you to use your kit lens as a macro lens and allows the focal distance to be digitally reduced and come as close to your subject as possible, and manages everything else as well. It manages your shutter, it manages your ISO, because it knows that if you're very close to your subject, the minutest of shakes will make a difference. So that is every time controlled by the macro thing, and it automatically does it. The landscape mode gives you the best combination needed for landscape, but remember, if you're shooting against the sun, it will always give you darker images. So if you want the brightness on the mountains and the sun to be there, use the manual mode instead of landscape mode. Night portrait mode usually plays with a fixed aperture and shutter and gives you enough bandwidth with the ISO, but this gets grainy as well at times and you end up losing quality of image. The night portrait mode is best used when you are actually shooting people with a small hint of light falling on their face, and this will allow you not to get the motion blur with your camera, but if the subject moves, you will still get a blur. Portrait mode actually is a combination of the widest opening of your aperture and the largest opening, and it combines it with the perfect shutter speed that is needed to get that motion. If your subject is moving a little bit, maybe they're flickering their eyes or something is going on, their hair is flying, you need to capture that in a beautiful way. So the portrait mode creates a combination that does it very, very well. And the sports mode in the end is all about shutter. It allows you to capture fast speed motion at higher shutter speeds and give you the best possible combination using the ISO and the aperture as well. Okay, so there is somebody who has a birthday event happening, and there's somebody who has a family get together happening in their family, and they need to understand what are the best settings that they can use. Guys, if you're stuck in indoor situations where you don't have enough light, right now, if I zoom out the camera, you will be able to see the amount of lights that I have actually used for this live session. So imagine what kind of lights will you need when it comes to getting that perfect exposure on the situation that you're in. Best thing to do is reach your location, understand your ambient light. You need to read the ambient light. You need to identify your light sources. You need to identify the sources where the light is coming from, and managing all of that, you will be first setting your aperture. Since you are doing people and they will be dancing, it's a birthday or it's a roka ceremony, they will be dancing. So your aperture should be between a 2.8 to a 4.5 or a 5.6. Your shutter should be anywhere between 1/60th of a second to about 1/125th of a second. That works brilliantly. Now, indoor situations always demand you to play with the ISO. Your whole game comes down to the perfect ISO settings that give you the perfect result. If you hit too much of low ambient light, kindly go and inform the organizers that you will need more light and they will increase light. Or use a flash. Use a speed light if you don't have any of those options. Speed lights always freeze motion and you get some brilliant effects, but remember, you're shooting indoors. If you hit the speed light directly, you will get harsh shadows. So bounce the speed light either on a bounce card or on the roof if the roof is not too high. It works mind-blowingly amazingly and you get some nice images. And the best advice that I can give to you is take the speed light off the camera, use it separately, and you will get some amazing results. We actually talk about all of this in our master classes. Our master classes teach you anything and everything from fashion to macro to food to event photography and the best settings for everything, and that happens only in the master class. Today we are only concentrating on the tip of the iceberg. So one of the most important things that we need to understand is how do you hold a camera? And how do you get a perfect shot? So there has to be a perfect combination which is ideal for any situation. First of all, you need to hold your camera with the grip. This is where the battery is, so your hand should be fully firm on the grip, and the second hand should be as a base on the bottom, and keep it as close to your body as possible. This will give you a beautiful, nice and steady. If you see, all my hands, my elbows and everything is very close to me and very tight to my body, and I only use my viewfinder to click shots. Even if I'm using my LCD, I will not do this. I will not take it away from my body. I hold it as close to my body as possible. If I am in longer situations, I flip the screen and I do this. So all of this is doable when you hold the camera right, and if you hold the camera right, you avoid at least 60% of blurred images that come through motion blur. We have a question: what do you do if the background has more light but has more shadow on the face? Can control backlight? You can't control backlight if your camera does not have the dynamic range to do it. But what you can do is you can add light from your side. Use a flash, use a speed light, or use continuous lighting and put them on your subject, and your subject will be balanced. Balance it with the backlight and you will get good results. Again, so how do you get sharp images? Guys, take a screenshot of this screen right now, or you can get the high resolution from the Shoot Guru app. When I upload this video tomorrow, the video will carry the notes in the study material, and it will be available to you guys for free on the Shoot Guru app. So don't worry about copying it or taking screenshots on your mobile phone, which is low resolution. Get the high resolution PDF once I upload it. So first of all, pick a mid-level aperture. This is f5.6 to f8, and you need to give a spot enough depth of field with most lenses. When you're doing tele shots, an f8 or an f5.6 will also work, and this is brilliant when it comes to street photography or when it comes to event photography, when you definitely need everything in focus and everything very sharp. But if you're doing portraits, it's okay to open your aperture more, but you will have to mind the shallow depth of field and the shallowness in front of your in the foreground as well. Then you make sure the camera is steady, either use a tripod or use your hands, and make sure that it does not move too much. Don't play with the ISO too much. If you have ISO over 640, you will start getting noise. You will start getting, the camera sensor starts heating up to capture more light. The quality of light reduces and you end up losing the quality of light. And of course, the shutter speed and the focal length of your camera are very much interrelated. This is something which is a kind of a surprise for you guys, because nobody really talks about this and I have never seen any tips on this. So today I am actually giving you something which is my master tip, which is what is the best combination of stabilization when you are at different shutter speeds and at different focal lengths. Usually your focal lengths work brilliantly when they're your shutter speeds work brilliantly when they're double the focal lengths. Let's say I am shooting with a lens that is 28 mm, close to 30 mm. If you see my shutter speed at 1/60 is green, that means I can shoot handheld without actually adding a tripod or losing stability. And as and when it goes up, it automatically sinks. But for low, the more you go in your focal length, let's say you go to about a 200 mm lens, you will need higher speeds. Because what happens in a 200 mm lens, guys, imagine you're going closer to your subject. That means your focus area, your movement of your area is very less. Little bit of movement will also create a shake. That happens when you do tele lenses. And in that case, you need higher shutter speeds to get great images, because you will have to capture your motion blur and freeze that as well. Now, when you are doing with image, though that was without image stabilization, that lenses don't have image stabilization, but what if your lens has image stabilization? Then your handheldness starts at about 1/20th, but I will avoid it. It is okay in a wide lens like a 15 mm, because minutest of shakes will not show. You might get some motion blurs because of 1/20th of a second, but if you're doing landscapes, if you're doing night photography, if you're doing cityscapes, you will get some great results at 1/20th of a second as well. If you are shooting very wide, so if you're shooting a 15 mm lens, go for 1/20th, it will work, but avoid it. Go above 1/20th. I prefer 1/60th and above for one simple reason, that is what your real capability lies, and you have to maintain it. If you can go below that, amazing, but you will start getting motion blur. I hope things are clear till now. I'm going to take 30 seconds break to check questions and I'm going to move ahead. Okay, coming back to, so since there are no more questions, there's one question about full frame and crop factor. Well, it is the size of the sensor. This right here is a full frame sensor. This is a 35 mm film equivalent. It is a very large sensor. A micro four thirds or a crop factor lens would be actually really small when it compares to this, and will have less low light capabilities and less depth of field. The basic difference both the sensors is actually the size. A full frame sensor is massive. It captures more light. The pixel density is much higher. The pixel sizes is much higher. Imagine a 24 megapixel camera with a full frame versus a 24 megapixel camera with a crop sensor. How small the pixel gets. So that is the lesser amount of information, or the plane on which information is recorded, and you get that information. So the basic difference is the size of the sensor and the amount of pixel density it has, and what you really get in the end is better light capability and of course better depth of field. That is what really the sensors really do, and of course the image quality increases, and of course professionals prefer full frames versus crop sensors, and that is because of better image quality. So going ahead, we are talking about composition. I am not taking up color in today's thing, because we are going to go about color in a master class that is happening very soon. The details will be on the app. If you guys are interested in the master class, do talk to us towards the end of this live session. We will give you discounts if you have attended this workshop. Now let's talk about composition. You've understood what your settings are, you've understood how your camera really works. Now it all comes to the aesthetics. How to get your frame right, how to make those images really beautiful, and what to give them so that your photography is something that is talk of the talks in the market. So here are some rules, and these are not fixed rules. These are rules that you need to understand only because you can break them. So these are some of the rules. Can I have the full screen for the audience, please? Awesome. So all the rules are visible to you, and I'm going to take them up one by one. My first rule today is the rule of thirds. A basic human tendency is to read things in threes. Your phone number keypad comes in threes: 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Your phone numbers, when they were 9-digit numbers, were written like that, and that is because human mind reads the number 3 or 3 figures or 3 combination very easily and retains it. Hence an image where your frame is actually I'm gonna add something. Just give me 1 second, please. I'm just gonna see if I can. No, I can't. Anyways, let that be. So if you see the image on the screen, the windmills, there are multiple windmills in my frame, but the one of them is on the rightmost corner for us when we view it. So it is actually falling in the positive area of the image, the negative area of in the negative area of the image, and this is where your negative area ends and the positive starts. Since there are more windmills in the back, that becomes my positive area where there is action happening. If I would have cropped the left side more and taken the right side more where there was nothing, it wouldn't have been interesting. And the rule of third allows me to keep my subject in focus because the subjects come closer to your frame or you isolate them. Here is another example where I have top of a church. This is in Goa, and there is a lot of water around it. There's a beautiful sky. So all the action was in the sunset happening in the back, and what that allowed me to capture was the space, the positive space where the action is, and I kept the subject, which is the cross, in the left side of my rule of thirds. And that allowed me to create a story behind it where you tell people where you are. There must be something that would have happened. Maybe the church sank, maybe the river rose in levels. So there is a question that comes in the mind of a viewer. If I would have kept it in the center, I would have lost my sunset, I would have lost the sky, I would have actually moved away from my subject and not isolated it where the attention really flows. You have to be balancing elements. If you have shadows, if you have lines, if you have symmetries, everything needs to be very balanced. Balancing elements is something that comes with practice. If you see anything with symmetry, if you see anything that creates texture, if you see anything that is created by shadows, always try balancing the weight. Heavier it is, keep it closer to your camera. The lighter it is, keep it away. Similarly, if you have buildings, keep them away and keep people as close to your camera. This technique will allow you to kind of frame symmetries and have a balance in your images with the different elements that your images have to focus on. Leading lines are something you and I live with. You're walking on the road, the path on the side creates a leading line. You're on the highway, you're in the mountains, the mountain highway creates a leading line towards the horizon. You are on a beach, you see a jetty like this, the jetty is creating a leading line onto the horizon, and your eyes will go towards the sunset that is happening in the back and not too much towards your foreground. So you have to understand that leading lines, as the name goes, lead a viewer to the subject where you want to draw their attention towards. The best example is when you are clicking anything on the road, keep the road lines as your leading lines and the subject in the center or the left or the right, and you will always get a very beautiful composition. If you look at this, I have my jetty as my rule of thirds, but there is a leading line that is taking me towards the horizon, and that is what the story is. The story is the sunset happening in the background. We have symmetries, windows, doors, parked cars, 3 dogs on the street, 3 kids on the street. Everything talks about symmetry. And when it comes to symmetry, one of my favorite photographers is Vineet Vora, who does mind-blowing symmetries, and some of his images are just wow. Latest image that came from him was the Factor X series that he's recently done as a campaign, and the images look so amazing, and there is symmetry in places where you and I can't even imagine. So symmetry are good, symmetries look good, but again, rule of three. 3 is something that is registered by your viewers, 3 is something that will be registered by your audience, and they will be intrigued to understand what they can actually know more about the image. Then you have something which is called viewpoint or perspective. Now viewpoint and perspective changes from person to person, place to place, things to things. If you're doing food photography, this is a tip. If you're doing food photography, perspective really works. And if you shoot macro, that is where perspective is all amazing, because you're very, very close to your subject. But if you're doing architecture, if you're doing monuments, if you're doing landscape, again, perspective really draws attention of your viewers to something which is interesting or looks interesting because how you have portrayed it. So perspective or viewpoint images are beautiful when you want to take the attention of your viewer to something that interests you, or tell them a very different kind of a story that will actually help them to gather more information about what you really want to show. Then framing. You have a frame, but then you have a frame inside a frame. Arcs, archways, doors, windows, all of these are frames inside of frames, and they look mind-blowingly beautiful. They look amazing. Frames inside of frames tell stories. If you look at this, my main composition were the 2 kids with their mother. If I crop it just to them, it's a beautiful composition on its own. But as soon as I got them in the center of a frame, in the center of this image, so when Kabir took this image, he made sure that the subject also comes as a silhouette and the background is much more clear, and you now know that you're at a fort in Delhi where you are getting these arcs and you are getting your subjects moving out, and that is a storytelling. Guys, when it comes to photography, it is all about storytelling, and stories are all around you. They're things that you can look at and they're things that you can feel. Look for space. Space is something that will hold the attention of your viewers to a story on the subject. For example, if I would have cropped to the monk standing on the right, you would have never guessed where the monk is standing. He could have been standing in a market. He could have been standing inside a bathroom for that matter. So you never know what will happen next. But now you know that the monk is standing inside a monastery. There is an open space around that monk. There is some breathing space around the monk, and there is a positive space around the monk that is talking about a story that is actually allowing the viewers to get the story of their own. What you really have to understand is photography is an active medium. Film is a passive medium. When I talk about photography, photography makes your user more active. It allows, the viewer more active to think what you as a photographer are trying to portray, what you as a photographer are trying to say, and where the game is. The game is when you start telling stories. That is how you will retain your audience onto your Instagram page when you click the next best picture. And of course, as always, here are some tips for photographers, because this is my last slide for the day and we are also very much over time. We are going to take some questions up. If you have questions, I am looking at the chat box for the next 11 minutes. I'm still here. We will shut this live down at 10:30 sharp. Till then, please go ahead and ask questions related to anything. I have a question that went up regarding filmmaking. I will take that up. And guys, here are some tips. Number 1, know your camera like the back of your hand. You should understand the settings of your camera in and out. You should know what button does what, how the different functions work, and where you can manage whatever you are trying to do. And what it essentially does is it will allow you to click images that are beautiful without taking your camera off from your eye, because you're actually wasting time and you might miss moments, especially when you're doing wedding, when you're doing events. every single thing around you is a frame. Every single thing around you is a story. So you have to be very, very careful about getting some really, really beautiful images, some really, really beautiful shots, and you have to be ready. So know your camera, know your settings, know your shutter, know your aperture, know your ISO, and play with compositions. Guys, those were not rules, those are rules that you can break if you know them. Start playing with compositions, start playing with what you can really do with whatever you can. Practice, 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 practice. Practice is what makes you perfect. Now going ahead, the second tip that I want to give you is play with light. Light is your best friend. Start clicking pictures in different lighting situations. Start clicking pictures in situations where you would face problems on real life situations, or you wouldn't, and just practice and create your own combinations that work brilliantly for what you do and how you do it. So you have to start playing with light. And third tip for the day is you need to I will rephrase it. You need to stop falling in love with the images that you create and letting them go, because the first 10,000 images that you click, because it's the digital era, will be shit. Sorry, don't mind my French, but that is the truth. Don't fall in love with the images. Just don't go and clicking every squirrel or every bird that you see when you're starting off with your camera. Start creating stories. Start telling stories. You are a content creator. That is what you are doing in reality. You should be focused on creating brilliant stories with what you have and what you can do. So there are some upcoming programs that you guys can join till the time I actually take up more questions. The link to the Shoot Guru app is in the description of this video, and you will get both the iOS and the Android app. For iOS, you will get an app called My Institute, so don't worry, that is our app. You just have to add an organization code once you install it, and you will switch to Shoot Guru app. Going ahead, so we have some questions that have come up. DSLR for intermediate photographers. Any DSLR that fits in your budget is the best DSLR that you can have. If you want to sustain a longer time in the market, buy a DSLR that works brilliantly for you, even in very, very affordable budget. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Work towards it. Then how to get the bokeh effect. The larger your aperture, the more bokehs you get, and the closer to your subject you are, the better bokeh you will get. You get bokeh in portraits, you get bokeh in product photography, you get bokeh when you're clicking people, because the subject has to be very near to your camera. Even if you're using kit lenses at about, let's say, an 1855 lens, at 55 lens mm, it is actually about 70 mm on a crop factor lens camera. If you take that and an f3 4.5 or a 5.6, whatever it is, it will still give you bokeh if you're closer to your subject. On wider lenses as well, the moment you go closer, you will create a very mild blur in the background that gives you a nice bokeh as well. How important is histogram? Histogram is a session on its own, but let me give you a tip for histograms. Histograms are important when you're stuck in lighting situations where you cannot manage light, where you cannot work with light, but you still need to balance your shot. Your shot needs to look good, and your histogram will just allow you to manage that, because when you sit with the raw image in post, if your histogram was haywire, you will not be able to do much, but if your histogram was balanced, you will be able to balance your shot. Rishabh, I've already talked about something about depth of field, but the depth of field session is part of our masterclass. There is a masterclass, an advanced photography workshop coming up on the Shoot Guru app tomorrow. For this workshop holders, if you are interested, come to me and we will give you discount code. So what you do is you just write into us onto our WhatsApp number. I will mention the WhatsApp number in the scroller that is going on top of my head. You see the WhatsApp number. Save that number. That is a personal private line that comes to me. And in that number, if you DM us or you WhatsApp me what you want to do, I will get you special discounts. Every person who attends our workshops gets special discounts in whatever we do. Is Canon 1200D good for beginners? It is only good for beginners. You will not be able to survive with it for in the future. You will end up buying a bigger camera in future. So guys, it says this here is a recommendation to everybody. Buy a camera that lasts you longer. Buy an ecosystem that does not burn your bank, and that is what the camera that you need. You need to work on your ecosystem. You need to work on the camera that you're buying. Please don't waste your money in entry-level cameras, because you will actually end up losing quality, and when you get into professional work, that's not going to help you. Prasanna, I have already talked about the relationship between aperture, ISO and shutter. They control exposure. If you rewind this video to the beginning, that is how we started. This video will be available on YouTube next few hours till tomorrow, till I upload it on the app. It will still be here, but until then, please rewind and see it and just try your hand out on that. We actually don't have any more questions. Guys, if you have any more questions, just go ahead and ask. Otherwise, if you can just look at the screen, we have 3 workshops that are coming up. We have an advanced photography workshop, an advanced Photoshop program, and a master in social media. If you go to the Shoot Guru app, and if you see what we have in the Shoot Guru app store, there are a couple of programs that are running there already. The social media thing is where we make influencers out of you, where we make sure that your growth on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever platform you're on increases tenfold. And especially we can help you with Instagram, with our strategies and everything. If you guys are interested in joining the influencer program, that is the social media workshop, or the master of social media workshop, that happens on the 22nd of August. Please DM and or put in the chat box here, and put in the comments over here, and we will connect with you our posters workshop and how you can join it. And of course, a special 10% discount and a hand holding of 1 whole month. I will personally hand hold you for 1 whole month if you join the program now. So what is the cheat key to take sharper portrait pics for modeling and candid photography? I am gonna upload this later, but just for your reference, I'm gonna show you guys what my cheat sheet is when it comes to shooting sharper images. This is my cheat sheet right here, and this allows me to actually get some amazing shots with whatever I have in whatever situations I have. I just have to move along with some of the permutation combinations, and of course the focal length. Telephoto lenses, if you see, the shutter is 1/80th of a second, and the telephoto is about 70 mm. Similarly, wide lens is about 28 mm, 1/30. So it's very correlated to each other, and they work brilliantly when it is synced like that and gives you a perfectly sharp image. Macro lens is only good for macro situations, especially product and creative shots. It is not good for anything else. It is not good for portraits, especially because it will not give you the shallow depth of field. But if you want to go creative portraits, let's say you want to click the eye of the model, then of course a macro lens works for you. What camera angle? Okay, I'll tell you what lens. Any lens on a full frame camera ranging between 28 mm to 35 mm is beautiful for street photography. And eye level is always good. Start shooting eye level when you are doing in terms of angles, but you will have to move around. 360 degree is your world. Your head can move 360, your whole body can turn around, everything can turn around. That is where your game is, that is where your platform is, and again, that's how you work towards it. And just be careful in what you're shooting and capture the most as you can. I guess that's pretty much it, and we have actually run out of time. We just had time till 10:30. That was already buffered time. I am sorry for the delay today. I hope you guys learned something today in this session. And if you have more questions, we are available in the comment section. Keep putting your questions in, we will answer them as comments. And of course, I am available on the app. When you join the app, you get a direct line with me. And of course, the WhatsApp number running on the top is my personal private line that will give you access to me and ask your questions directly. And if in case you have not installed the Shoot Guru app, the link is in my description, and please do check it out. Please install it. Guys, take care, have a great night, and some good words or something you liked about this would work as well. These work as a testimonial. So if you like what you see here, I'm going to be here for next 20-30 seconds. Just put it in the chat box and I will definitely give you a shout out on Instagram. Do put your Instagram handle next to it. Praneeth, there is a question by Praneeth about streetlights and rain. Do photography at night. Rain photography at night with streetlights works beautifully because you can actually capture each and every droplet and get beautiful reflections on the road. That is mind-blowing. Try clicking HDR. HDR images of rain look very pretty. Thanks Aman, thanks Saurabh, thanks Devesh, thanks Sushmatan, thanks Aman, thanks Roshan, thanks Saivineet, thanks Rishabh, thanks Vincent, thanks Ria, thanks Gautam. Guys, thank you for attending, and you guys, thanks Madhav, thank you for your compliments. Dhruv, let's take that offline. That's a very long question. So I used a Premiere template for it. Now I'm exporting the video, but it is taking very much time. Switch your system. Premiere is very unstable with entry-level systems. Ask somebody if you want to render your files later. Ask somebody with a bigger system. Go give a shout out on Instagram. Somebody with a bigger system might be able to help you. If nobody does, come to me. I will help you. Send me your files. I will render them for you. Thanks Madhav. Thanks Praneeth. Alright guys, you have a beautiful week ahead and everything. Take care. Have a good night. Ciao.